So has it ever happened that you killed one of your characters, maybe the main one or some supporting ones, and then the part was cast and the actor didn't want to die?
Did happen. It happened with Stallone in Fist. At the ending of Fist, the character, Johnny Kovac, it was originally called Kovac, and the name was changed. But at the end of that piece, Johnny Kovac is killed by the mob, and Stallone the slide come off of Rocky, and I think Paradise Alley was about to come out, and he was a big star. He was on the cover of Newsweek, and he said, "I'm just not going to die." He didn't want to die. He said, I said, "Sly, we all die." He said, "Fuck that, I don't care. I'm not an amazing star." And he said, I don't think I should die. So it turned into a monumental issue, and Norman Jewison, very strongly, the director, said, "You have to." He said, "This thing is like Greek tragedy. You have to be killed at the end. You're responsible for the murder of your best friend, and that you arranged, so you have to die." And he said, "No." They were on the set in Dubuque, Iowa, and they finally had lawyers fly in there, both from the studio and from Stallone. And he insisted he wasn't going to die, and Norman said they were going to sue him. And they finally worked out a deal. The deal was that he would die once, they would shoot it once, and if they didn't get it right, forget it, Sly lives, right? So Jewison knew that he had to really make this good. He had one shot at it. And they do it, and Norman shoots it, and Sly dies, and he argues that it's a terrible shot. And Jewison said too, it's a great line, he said, "Forget it, you're dead already. You can't talk now, you're dead already." So yeah, it did happen.
Just getting back to Stallone not wanting to die on First Blood either.
Oh, really?
He wanted to stay alive, but there wouldn't have been a sequel then. So we thought we tested, and funny enough, because we tested both of the endings, and where he stayed alive tested a lot better than where he died. So we went with the flow and made 3 movies out of it.
Yeah, well, that's great. Many years later with Sly, we became friends after the huge hassle, and we were coming out of the Paramount commissary, and they were doing construction on the lot. So we step out, and there's no sidewalk, and we'd had a long lunch. He steps out, here comes a truck, right? And they literally pushed him out of the way of the truck. And I said, "See, you almost died." And he said, "Don't start that shit with me again."
So which one of your movie was the easiest and the hardest to develop?
That was difficult to develop?
Yeah, which you had a lot of problems with structure and plotting.
Oh, you mean where I had to do a lot of rewriting?
Yes.
I did something like 14 drafts on Flashdance, but that was partly because the producer, Don Simpson, was a good friend of mine, and he was completely crazy. And it was more argument than anything else, than rewrites. So I did all these things, and he finally went back and used my second rewrite. And then, 3 months had gone by, and a lot of energy. And I said to him, "Well, why did you have me do all this shit, instead of using the second one?" He said, "Because I could." So that was the most rewriting that I did. I shouldn't have told Andy that story, because God knows what doors it's going to open up in terms of future work together. So.
Lots of rewrites.
Okay. Kérdés?
There's one up there.
I was thinking of trying without the microphone, but now it's better with this way. I have, again, a 2-part question, but probably you can connect them once again. The first part of the question is, you've done it in many of your movies, actually, even in the film which we saw this morning, how wonderfully you fast and powerfully introduced your main characters. I wonder how much effort and how much thought you put into that we, the audience, very quickly get to know your character, get to know what he or she is about, and what is his or her goal, at least at the time of the start of the story. The second part of the question is about events. Even once again, in Basic Instinct, you have a lot of events in the scenes where the character is changing. His or her motives changes within the scene, making the scene that much better. And my question to that is, how much do you consciously set up the goal for yourself that I'm going to write a scene where my main character changes within the scene itself?
I never do that, where I purposely set up, the goal, the character to change. I do really believe in getting into it very quickly, introducing the characters very quickly, because I believe that you've got to grab the audience right away, or you're not going to have. And one of the things that I fault many films for is that it takes really some time to get to the main character and to understand it. My feeling is that the sooner you get to that character, and the faster you're fascinated or interested by that character, the better off you are in terms of the film. In terms of changing them, to get back to the original and the scene question, changing them during a scene, once again I go back to this notion of channeling and hearing the characters. They really tell me what to do once I get to know them that well. And I can literally hear their voices and hear and write down when they say something. So I think when it really works, the characters define their own identity within this false little world that I've set up, set up for them.
So can I have a follow-up question then? So did you ever get into an argument with your own character that he or she wants to do something different than what you thought she should do within the course of the story? And if yes, who wins this argument, and how do you manipulate it through that you eventually get to the point, if you have the final outcome of the movie, but your character doesn't want to go that way, who wins it, and what is the process what you're going through?
Dude, I didn't say that this was a democracy, this little world that I had, right? I didn't say that. I can be very tyrannical, right, and say, no, you're going to die. Forget about it, right? That at a certain point, you do have to, if that happens, and it has, you do have to have this interior dialogue, with your character, and say, no, you can't do that. It's not, it's wrong, blah, blah, blah. And if the character argues with you, you have to say, well, tough shit, I'm the one writing it, you're not. So that's also true.
I understand you have very little respect for Mr. McKee, I sort of gathered, but you must have read his books or probably heard about his...
I'm glad there's a McKee question, that's good.
Well, the point I'm getting at is now, when you started off as a screenwriter, the paradigm was not really a big issue. Now, screenwriting is being taught all over the world. And what they teach is you should keep to the paradigm, structure, 3-act structure, and all that. And there's a whole science of it, you can say. Now, I understand that you're a very instinctive writer.
I'm a heretic considering those kinds of sciences, yes.
And I think all your stories, they conform to the paradigm in a good sense, as in you can find the paradigm in your stories.
Fuck the paradigm.
Yeah, fuck the paradigm, I know.
The paradigm doesn't matter.
What I'm getting at is, I know you don't use the paradigm, but when you do a rewrite or when you're revising your story, do you use those terms, even just for yourself? I'm not talking about pitching or talking to studio executives. Just when you revise your story, do you use those elements of the structure and the paradigm, like say, where's the midpoint, crossing the threshold and all that? So does it help you? Do you use those terms?
Dude, I don't even...
When you approach your own story.
I don't even use the word paradigm.
Okay.
And even that, let alone what the paradigm means. I don't even like people who talk about paradigms very much, so that's the best way I can answer it, I said you were dark earlier, but I had no realization that it was going to be paradigm stuff, so.
Do you think it could be helpful for other people to use the paradigm who are not as instinctive as you are?
You truly are dark, I will say that. Anybody else have any paradigm questions? Robert McKee questions? Look, my basic problem with McKee is that he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's never had a script that's been made into a film or television. And he's teaching, right? He's teaching kids and taking their money. And if I were one of those kids, I would say, what do you know about this, man? What have you done? You know? But instead they go in there like Moonies and come out babbling about paradigms, right? And that's what happened, you know?
But just to stick up for, not for McKee, because we're not.
Jesus, don't do that.
No.
It's the M word.
But Joe's screenplays have great structures, and they're always there, because he feels it within himself, and he feels it in his writing, and he knows instinctively how that works, and that's the talent. And that is something you can't teach. That's something you've got or you don't got. So if you have the talent where you can feel it instinctively and tell a great story and write it, not because it's Act 1 or Act 2 or Act 3, but because that's really the way the story goes, and it's automatically an Act 1 and an Act 2 and an Act 3. So that's where Joe is a genius, and we'll only have to correct him a couple of times.
He's never called me a genius before. I'm going to make him eat those words at some point, you know. But thank you, Andy. Thank you.
So can I have one more question to Mr. Weiner in terms of, now as we are talking about the paradigm, I have the thing.
We weren't
I'm talking about.
You are.
He's back. I thought I got rid of him. He's back.
No, the question is, I personally think that it's being pushed too much, structure, paradigm, and all this. Do you, as a producer, what is your take on, you know, forcing the structure? Because I know that sometimes studios and producers do force writers to conform to the paradigm, and it can be a really bad thing.
So for me,
I'm going to write a piece that says,
The
conform
paradigm.
to the paradigm. Right, exactly, right.
for me, it's rather simple. I read a script. I read a story. I don't read structure. I don't stop and say, well, wait a minute, this is supposed to be Act 1. I read that story through, and it either works or it doesn't. And then if it doesn't work, then I search for the reason why. And it may be because of structure, maybe because of character, maybe because of all those things that are basics. But I never start reading a screenplay or stop reading and say, ooh, the structure is lousy. But if the thing doesn't work, if it doesn't engross me, if I don't go with the story and I'm bored to death of turning pages and I'm forcing myself to read it, then there's something wrong. And usually you can go back to some of those basic things and they'll give you the answer. But I don't think you got to stick to rules. I think you need to stick to good screenplays and good stories and good telling of stories, which is what you guys need to get the hang of, you know, and get out there and start writing and telling stories. And that's what will make you, I think, a good writer.
Paradigm, no. There's a saying that the young screenwriters get a lot, that your first and second script will suck no matter what you do. Maybe your third one will turn out decent. Do you think it's true? What was your very first and second script?
It did suck. It did. My very first piece was Fist, and I'd never written a script before. I barely knew that each page was a minute, and I did it for United Artists, and it was a step deal. I researched it for about 6 months. This is the script about unions in the 30s and what happened to them and how the bank's goons came down on them and how the government came down on them. So I did all this research, and all across the country, and I came back and they asked me to do this thing called, it wasn't an outline, it was a treatment. It was a treatment. And I had no idea what a treatment was. So Norman Jewison was the director involved, and I sent him this treatment, and he asked me to come see him, and he said, I was 26 years old, I think, and he said, kid, he said, I don't know what the fuck this is. He said, this is non-fiction. He said, what is this, fiction, non-fiction, or what is this? It's just short story. It sure as hell isn't a treatment, and it's not a script. Okay, so we talked and talked, and he said, go write your first draft. And I wrote a first draft of this that was 420 pages long. That's 420 minutes of screen time, right? And I sent it to Norman with great pride, and he said, he called his assistant, called me and said, Norman would like to speak to you, come on down. Okay, come down to Malibu. So I went down, and he said, he held it up, said, look at this. And he's a very twinkly-eyed, flinty man. And he said, it weighs like War and Peace, kid, but it sure doesn't read like it. And I said, what do you mean? What's wrong with it? He said, there's a monologue in here that goes on for 14 pages. It's a monologue. That means 14 minutes on screen. He said, that means they're going to throw tomatoes at the screen. He said, people are going to get up in the audience and throw tomatoes at it. And I said to him, but Norman, if the words are good, why wouldn't they like it? Right? He looked at me, and he looked at me and says, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? He said, I'm trying to help you, okay? He said, I've directed a few movies, and he'd had like 6 big hits. And he said, the movie that they want me to direct right now is Ragtime, the Dr. O bestseller. Very hot property. They want me to direct this, and I'm saying, no, and I'm not sure because I'm working with this kid who keeps giving me shit every time he hands me something. So he said, take another crack at it. I did. I got it down to 220 pages. That's 220 pages of screen time, but he liked that one. And we spent 2 weeks by a little lake in Canada going through it piece by piece, page by page. And I went back and wrote one that was 150. And in the process of this man's generosity, I learned about screenwriting, because he sat there with me day to day, going through all the pages, and he said, this is good because of this, and this doesn't work because of this. And I was truly blessed by God to have been given that opportunity. And I learned everything I had to in terms of writing, beginning to be a screenwriter. He made the movie ultimately. Instead of Ragtime, he made the movie. We had great expectations for the movie because Stallone had just come off of Rocky. And the movie disastered in every way, commercially and critically disastered. And then we had to do a premiere in Dubuque, Iowa. And we knew by then that the movie had failed. And Jewison said, are you coming to Dubuque? And I said, are you kidding me? He said, you owe me. He said, you better come to this thing, because I'm not the only one who's going to get rigid smiling over 3 days, knowing that this thing is going into the toilet. So I went. We promenaded up and down the main streets of Dubuque, smiling. And on the way back from Dubuque to Chicago, our plane almost crashed. That was the topper. And Jewison got up in the middle of this wild thunderstorm, and he said, turned to me and he said, if we all die here, I get the first paragraph, and you're in the bottom of the story. I just want you to understand that, right? So it was a great education all the way around. How I did what? How I cheated the margins? You want me to tell you? You want me to tell this story publicly? He shouldn't hear this story. But
let me first say that here we don't use the 8x10 sheets that give you the 1 minute of screen time.
No.
We use some other facsimile
Oh, I see.
that that nobody knows what it really is. So consequently, they just write, and then we're sort of guess what the timing is.
Oh, that's interesting.
In Hollywood, it's a real profession that when you're writing those pages, they usually turn out to be usually 1 minute of screen time, unless it has a lot of action.
Right.
In which case, it could be anything.
But you see, I figured out what Naomi's referring to is on Betrayed. I wrote a script, first draft, actually the final draft, which timed out at like 2 hours, a little less than 2 hours. What they didn't know is that I hooked up with my typist in LA, and I said, extend the margins farther, and extend them this way too, and use a smaller font type, right? And so she did. And they started shooting the movie, and one day I got a desperate call from the set in Calgary. Erwin Winkler called me and said, this is terrible. The script, instead of 2 hours, is going to be 2 hours and 50 minutes. I don't know what's happened here. The margins are all screwed up. You have to come to the set. I said, why do I have to come to the set? I knew Costa was going to be very angry. He said, why do I have to come to the set? He said, because we have to cut from what has not yet been shot, which was a nightmare. You know, so I went up, and because the stuff had been, so I had to cut stuff that they hadn't yet shot. And the whole thing really exploded in my face. But I'm Hungarian. Things explode in your face sometimes. We all know that, right? So, and then this was one of the worst times. You know. Thank you for reminding me of that story.